Like Shakespeare's lifetime, agricultural changes to farms resulted in a huge upheaval in the industry. Today, entrepreneurs would call this disruptive innovation. In order to create a boom in the agricultural industry, they switched from free grazing of their livestock to enclosed farms. Now, this enclosed farming was more productive, and it was a more productive way to have farms, but that meant that they needed less farmers to tend the land. And this resulted in a massive amount of villagers finding themselves with no land, no grazing rights, and they had to head to the big city in search of work. Many of the Elizabethan poor laws passed during William Shakespeare's lifetime were designed to help this massive amount of farmers that found themselves newly poor because agriculture did a flip on its head. For the people who did remain farmers, they had to remain competitive by staying ahead of the industry, which meant they had to use certain tools and they had to pay attention to what was coming around the corner in the farming industry. But what were these new innovations and what were the tools that people used for farming? How does this relate to William Shakespeare's history, you ask? Well, there are documents that connect William Shakespeare and his father John to farming in three different ways. They're connected to sheep farming, growing of barley, and trading in stone. Now, I don't think there's anything to suggest William Shakespeare and his father John were farmers in that sense, but because they lived in Stratford Upon Avon and they liked to diversify their income, there is something to suggest that they played around in these industries at least a little bit as an alternate source of income to what was happening for William Shakespeare in London, of course, with his bread and butter of being a playwright. So this week, as we look into the farming connections of the Shakespeare family to William himself, we're asking the question, did Shakespeare use a wheelbarrow? Now, when you study history, it's kind of hard to know the overlap between the 16th and 17th century. Historians like to lump everything into this happened in the 16th century and that happened in the 17th century. And when you're studying the life of William Shakespeare, who was born in the middle of the 16th century and died at the start of the 17th century, you kind of have to get very specific on your dates to find out what was going on in his life. And as it happens, because he overlaps the two centuries, a lot of innovations and changes were going on in his life that were unique to his time period. So I wondered, was the wheelbarrow something that was new to William Shakespeare's life, or did he use the same kind of wheelbarrow that we have today? You know, I'm out in the back carrying around dirt and whatever to build my garden with my boys here at home. And the question comes up, did William Shakespeare have a tool like this when he was on his farm doing different things? And of course, we can't know if William Shakespeare himself would have used a wheelbarrow. But here's what we know about this particular farm instrument from his lifetime. There were a lot of tools that were used for farming and the growing of crops that would have been found in Stratford upon Avon, possibly there at New Place. And you had things like forks or a half pike, a pitch, gripes, gavelocks, which is like a crowbar, and all kinds of tools that could be used to dig up the soil. You have to remember they didn't have wagons at this time. I mean, I think they existed, but they were very rare. They weren't popular. So this wasn't something that most people would have had. In fact, most people did not have it, is the way that it went with wagons. Now, in Merry Wives of Windsor, Shakespeare mentions, "Have I lived to be carried in a basket like a barrow of a butcher's offal and to be thrown in the Thames?" And the word barrow there stuck out to me because as far as I can find, that's the only place William Shakespeare refers to a barrow. And they had different words in the 16th and 17th century for this kind of contraption where you had basically a basket that was made of wood. Sometimes it was actually made of a basket, but it had handles. And then at the front, there was a wheel. It turns out this invention is really, really old. The Chinese invented it way, way back, like 200s AD, maybe even earlier than that. It's extremely old. But in terms of European history, it was reinvented, and it seems to have been reinvented independently in medieval Europe around the 12th century. So by the time William Shakespeare had a farm, the concept of a wheelbarrow was something that existed. But what's cool is that they had several different varieties, and not one of them looked like what we have today. The Chinese version was like a big plane, and it had the wheel kind of in the center. Here's a great picture from Thought Company on the invention of the wheelbarrow, showing that Chinese wheelbarrows had this wheel under the middle, and European wheelbarrows were very much different. European wheelbarrows had them kind of at the front. That's one reason they think medieval wheelbarrows were reinvented independently in the 12th century, is because the design is so distinct from what had happened in China. I looked up a man named Tom Rettie actually built a 16th century wheelbarrow, and in his research, he put together a couple of different sources to determine what they would have looked like. And he makes a distinction between a wheelbarrow and a cart. He says that a cargo carrier with no wheels would be like a hand barrow. And this existed during William Shakespeare's lifetime, but it basically took two very strong men to lift this and carry things about in a hand barrow, which would have no wheels. So it's just a box with handles and two people would carry it around. Sometimes it would have one wheel, which is called a wheelbarrow, and that's why you had your hand barrow that had no wheels, and then you had it with one wheel. That's why it's a wheelbarrow. And then if you had two or more wheels, it functioned like a cart. I will link you to Tom Rettie's blog where he walks you through how he built this, because it was really interesting. And I'm trying to get him on the podcast, so we'll see if we can talk to him about his project in the future. But for now, I'm going to show you what he did, and I'm going to share with you some of the research he based his design upon, because all of his research comes from the life of William Shakespeare. There is a late 15th century book called Medieval House Book, and it shows several different barrows appearing there. There's also a Weldon Downland Museum in England where they have a reconstruction of this kind of 15th century wheelbarrow based on archaeological evidence from medieval London waterfront excavations. It has legs at the back of the box, but it doesn't have any metal reinforcement. There is a picture by Lucas Cranach the Elder titled The Fountain of Youth. And once you get over the shock of a whole bunch of naked bodies swimming in the fountain, look down in the bottom left-hand corner of this painting, and you will see that the older people that couldn't walk, they were being brought to the Fountain of Youth on what is called a wheelbarrow. And you'll see there the kind of hand barrow that's been adapted with a wheel on the front, so someone can stand at the back and pick it up and push something heavy. The other reference from Shakespeare's lifetime, now these are actually just before Shakespeare, because this painting was done in 1546, so that's 20 years before William Shakespeare was born. William Shakespeare was born in 1564, so we're kind of hitting to within his lifetime here. So don't write me letters about how this was pre-Shakespeare. I do know that, but it's right before Shakespeare, so it informs what would have been happening when he was first born, what would have been around. The next piece of wheelbarrow evidence I'd like to share with you is Pieter Aertsen's 1550 market scene, and you can see wheelbarrows in this painting as well. Last piece of evidence on what wheelbarrows would have looked like during the life of William Shakespeare that I want to show you comes from the British Library. Now, this predates Shakespeare, okay? This is from the 14th century. It was created in the 1300s in northern England, but it's called the Lustrell Psalter. Inside there's a man pushing a wheelbarrow, and he has a big strap over his shoulders. Like if you ever play guitar, it looks a lot like a guitar strap that you use to hold the guitar on. And it just goes over his shoulders to help lift some of the weight on the wheelbarrow. And this was to compensate for a design flaw in the European wheelbarrow. The man had to lift a large portion of the load. The wheel made it mobile, but the strength of actually picking it up came from the man using it himself. That made the wheelbarrow actually unuseful for moving large, heavy loads. So if you think about how William Shakespeare would have accomplished some of his dealings in wool, barley, and stone, you probably would not have used the wheelbarrow to transport a large order of stone. You would have had to use a cart or a sled, which were very popular at the time. Interestingly, exploration helped bring new versions of wheelbarrows into the world of William Shakespeare, because when people would go to China, they would find out about how they were doing things and bring those designs back. And so then you had two distinct designs of wheelbarrows meshing into one. As far as I can tell, the two designs meshing into where you have something that looks more like the wheelbarrow we have today, with the bucket that has the legs on the back and the wheel on the front and the handle sticking out from it so you can pick it up and push it. That kind of wheelbarrow is the meshed design, and that did not appear until after William Shakespeare's lifetime. As best as I can tell, that was a 17th century invention. And if you remember, William Shakespeare was only alive for the first 16 years of the 17th century. So just technically inside there. Now, if you have watched the movie, Disney's movie Pocahontas, where the settlers are in Jamestown and they are digging for gold and they are using the wheelbarrow, you'll notice that is 1607. They put leg on the wheelbarrow that they are using in that scene, and they would not have had wheelbarrows with legs. So there is a Disney anachronism for you there. Now, the last version of a wheelbarrow that I want to show you that probably did exist during William Shakespeare's lifetime, Pieter Aertsen's market scene painting of the wheelbarrow once more. This one was designed with longer handles, and so it could handle a larger load than the typical hand barrow or the one-wheeled wheelbarrow. And some of these were actually fitted with baskets on the front and would have been used by people shopping in markets. If you think about what a town market is, which was getting its start and becoming very popular in William Shakespeare's time, Stratford Upon Avon actually was a huge market town. People would travel from miles around to buy produce and things from the Stratford Upon Avon. It would have been something that people shopping in those kinds of markets where you're going from stall to stall buying things, they would have used a basket barrow like this to pick up their things and take it around the town. So as far as sights and sounds and what it was like to live William Shakespeare's life there in Stratford Upon Avon during the 16th into the start of the 17th century, wheelbarrows were definitely a part of William Shakespeare's life. That's it for this week here at Did Shakespeare. My name is Cassidy Cash. That's Shakespeare Girl. Thank you for being here. Don't forget to check out the membership platform of That Shakespeare Life. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that I am hosting. Every Monday, we go behind the curtain and into the life of William Shakespeare by interviewing the experts who know him best. And if you like the history that you're learning on the YouTube channel or on the podcast, you can take things a step further by becoming a member. Inside the membership, I have guides and courses, and you also get ad-free podcast episodes and ad-free YouTube episodes available there. So if you're a teacher, an educator, a home educator, or you just enjoy the history of William Shakespeare and want an all-access pass to my library of Shakespeare things that I pour into that every month, because every month we update it with new guides and new downloads and new videos. There's new videos and new podcasts every week, but then also an ebook and artwork that gets added every month. You get access to all of that as a member of That Shakespeare Life, and you get to support the work we do here by being a member, which means we get to continue bringing you Shakespeare history each and every week. If that sounds fun to you, please consider signing up at cassidycash.com/member. That's cassidycash.com/member. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.